Hello there and welcome to this course on Python fundamentals for healthcare. My name is Valentine and I'll be your instructor. In this course, we are going to take the following structure. We're going to start off learning about the learning objectives, which are just generally the goals of this session. So we'll take about 2 hours, but the idea is to have acquired those learning outcomes by the end of the 2 hours. After the learning outcomes, we'll get to learn about what is Python, what are those Python fundamental concepts that we need to understand and practice before now going into various use cases when it comes to its application in healthcare. We'll also get to learn about why we tend to learn about those concepts. We'll also talk about various stakeholders, deliverables, just essential concepts or theoretical concepts that will be important before undertaking this journey that will, be technical. So for the 10 minutes, we'll get just a macro perspective of the Python fundamentals. And then after those 10 minutes, we'll also take another 10 minutes, get to learn in an in-depth way about what we will have talked about. And we'll go through a theory reading, which is generally a reading that we have curated that will just cover the fundamentals or the different important aspects that we need to understand before going into practice. So the reading actually looks like what you're seeing on your screen. And the idea is that you go through this reading, which will provide just an in-depth perspective into the concepts that we'll have talked about in the first 10 minutes. And the idea is that you go through now this reading, which will just give you just a better idea of this journey when it comes to learning about Python. After going through the reading, you'll also go through the quiz, which will just assess your understanding of those concepts that you will have actually gotten to have been introduced to during that reading part, as well as the part that involves the what and why. After that, we'll go through now a practice session. The session is meant to take us about 60 minutes. And during this part of the workshop or part of the course, you get to practice various Python fundamental concepts using healthcare examples. And you'll also get to go through challenges that will ensure that you acquire the skills, the Python skills necessary for further, learning or further use when it comes maybe to data analysis or even just software development. And for that particular section of this particular course, we have also curated what is a notebook that will provide you with just practice of those concepts, Python fundamental concepts that will be sufficient enough for you to undertake that Python journey that you would want to undertake. So these are just general categories, but under each, say for example, data types and variables, this category, you have now the different concepts in relation to that. And there are examples that we'll have provided for each and every particular concept. Like for example, numeric data types, we go through a few, this is an integer. Actually, we have two integers, and we also have a float, which is what we're going also to discuss. And we also have a challenge that you can be able to work on that ensures that you have applied what you have learned in the example itself. So that's just a quick idea of how the practice part will go or will be like. And after that, after the practice work, then we'll talk about the next steps, which we'll get to cover at the end of this particular session. So for the 2 hours, you feel free to pause the video. If you realize that we're a bit too fast, you could also just rewind the video and just get to relearn those concepts that you feel like we might go a bit faster on. You can also ask questions in the chat, and if you're also more experienced and you feel like maybe you would want to undertake this course to just help you fill in those gaps that you might be missing, or you might want just a refresher course, you're more than welcome to also contribute to also answering some of the comments that or questions that will be posed by other learners within this particular session. So let's get started. So what what are we going to be learning? What are those goals that we're going to be working towards? So these are the four general goals or general learning outcomes. So by the end of this course, we should be able to demonstrate the ability to use Python syntax and variables for healthcare data manipulation. We should also be able to apply knowledge of Python data types, which are just classifications that we assign to data, and be able to use what are also called data structures to be able to hold data temporarily and perform some sort of analysis. We should also be able to use Python control structures for data manipulation. So if you've heard of something like if statements, you've heard of for loops, while loops, we'll also get to be able to go through that in this workshop. Lastly, we should be able to implement Python functions, which are a way of organizing code in Python that allows you to package your code in a reusable manner such that you don't have to rewrite code that you have already written in the past that performs a specific task that you'd want to perform again in the future. So those are the general learning outcomes. At the end of this particular workshop, you should be able to come back and have a look at them and note that you have been able to have achieved all those learning outcomes. So starting off, what is Python? What are these Python fundamentals that we are going to be learning? So these are just basics of the Python programming language. Python, just for ease of just clarifying, a programming language is that software that we can use to create other programs, and Python is one of those softwares, is one of those programming languages or software, you can think of it as like that we can use to create specific programs or software programs that perform specific tasks. So for example, we could decide to write Python code, which is what is the end result of programming languages. Usually use programming languages to write code. So we could write Python code that analyzes data and more tailored towards a specific data set that we have at hand. And in relation to the fundamentals, these would be the basic concepts in relation to Python that would help you to create solutions in now relation to healthcare problems that you might be facing. So Python fundamentals in healthcare would refer to applying the Python programming language to various aspects of the healthcare industry. And this can span from research to what would be happening in hospitals, etc. So a good example would be maybe health data analysts can use this tool, Python, to efficiently process large data sets that could contain just patient records or clinical trial data or medical imaging results. And in that process of using Python, they would perform what is called statistical analysis. They could end up creating data visualizations that help them identify patterns as well as trends, and be able also to, in some cases, if they need to, develop what are called predictive models, which are just programs or computer programs that learn from historical data and are able to make predictions. So that's just a good example of how we can be able to use Python fundamentals in healthcare. However, there are many use cases that we could talk about, and this particular session just serves as an introduction to this journey. So just know that by the end of today's workshop, you will have grasped the Python fundamentals for you to be able to use later onwards or get to learn about how you can be able to create predictive models that would focus maybe patient outcomes or even just identify health risks. So this can be the first workshop. This actually will be the first workshop of a series of other workshops that help you to get to learn skills, important skills that will be essential in your learning journey. So why would you want to learn about these Python fundamentals? There are various reasons why you would want to learn about these fundamentals. Like, for example, for a start, you might want to use Python maybe to perform data analysis work, or in some other cases, you might want to create predictive models, or what are called machine learning models. You could also use Python to create web applications, which would help you to, which actually would serve as a way of interacting with users. You could also use Python to create what are called Python scripts that allow you to automate various aspects of your workflow. Maybe you might have some data that you have collected about maybe patients, but you want to get maybe some critical insights. Then you can use Python for such a use case. So again, in terms of versatility, there are many. It just means that you can use Python for just different purposes. It could mean web application, for creating machine learning models, for just basic data analysis work. Simplicity and readability when it comes to understanding Python code. Normally, you would read Python code as if you are reading natural language. And many people that have also gone through this process of just learning about Python have talked about how Python is easier to learn as opposed to some other programming languages. In terms of efficiency, Python has been well tested across various contexts. And for example, you might be able to develop maybe a solution quickly that allows you to maybe recommend treatments, or you could also, in terms of efficiency, develop what are called chatbots, just healthcare chatbots that solve a particular problem. So as opposed to using maybe a traditional problem of you going to a healthcare provider or a patient going to a healthcare provider, you could develop those healthcare chatbots, which are just tools that are able to intelligently answer questions based on some knowledge database that you have trained that tool to use in order to provide responses. Data analysis and visualization, we can also use Python libraries, which are just chunks of code that have been developed to perform specific tasks. And these libraries, Python libraries, allow us to perform data manipulation, data visualization. We can even decide to maybe create interactive dashboards that allow various stakeholders be able to understand how an organization is doing or how a particular region is doing in relation to a research problem that they might be having. There are also other reasons. Machine learning, Python has extensive what are called libraries, again, extensive machine learning libraries that we can use to create these intelligent programs, which are called machine learning models, that allow us to efficiently make decisions. So for example, in the case of, let's say, a chatbot, the process would be that you would create a machine learning model that would learn from historical data to be able to make some sort of decision that you might be having. So there are quite a large number of libraries in relation to Python as opposed to other languages. There are also career opportunities. If you want maybe to become a healthcare data analyst, a bioinformatics specialist, or a healthcare software developer, a medical researcher, then Python can be a critical tool that will come in handy when it comes to just that learning or that journey that you would want to eventually undertake. Moving on, stakeholders. So in relation to Python, there are different stakeholders that would end up working with Python. There are healthcare administrators, and these administrators would probably be, maybe department heads of IT within a hospital. They could be in charge of overseeing probably implementation of Python-based solutions. So it's important sometimes for them to understand a bit of what's happening behind the scenes when it comes to how a tool primarily works. So maybe a hospital manager, IT manager, could oversee the implementation of a Python-based solution, maybe for for automating inventory management of medical supplies, or even for managing patient records, maybe like an electronic health record system. Health data analysts would also come in context, especially when it comes to extracting insights from, say, healthcare data, for example, electronic health records, or clinical databases, or even just medical imaging data sets. So they would be in charge of having that data that they want to use for analysis. They could import the data. They would then apply the data pre-processing techniques that would ensure the data would be important, or would help them answer the research problem that they are working towards, and they could then create a report afterwards. There are also informaticians who also specialize in biological and genomic data. So they could also use Python for maybe development of Python scripts or Python programs to maybe identify genetic variations associated with maybe certain diseases. There's a whole lot of that. Health data scientists would do almost the same case with health data analysts. There are software developers who would create systems or just Python-based applications, such as electronic health records. They might even develop telemedicine platforms or medical imaging softwares. So generally, software developers would use Python when it comes to the development of such solutions. Educators and researchers, say for example, a researcher might use Python to analyze maybe medical imaging data and be able to, create some sort of publication with regards to the findings that they got from the field that they are working in an effort to maybe answer some research question that they might have. So those are just some few stakeholders. We'll provide a few career roles that you might also look into in the reading as well. Deliverables. When it comes to working with Python, these are just some of the expected deliverables: data analysis, reports, predictive models, interactive dashboards, custom software applications, automated workflows, and research papers and publications. When it also comes to the reason why you'd also want to go for Python versus other languages, you might decide to go for Python because of simplicity, readability, as opposed to maybe a language like R. But again, if you learn, say, a tool like Python and shift maybe to R, then sometimes you might realize that that learning journey is a bit easier because the fundamentals remain the same. The fundamental concepts that we're going to learn about will just remain the same, and we will touch on those concepts in the next slide. If you also maybe look at the versatility aspect, so in relation to Python, you have a lot of libraries. Say for web development, you have libraries for machine learning, you have libraries for data analysis, you even have libraries for the creation of desktop applications using Python. as opposed to if you were to work with a tool like R, which is another programming language that's primarily focused on statistical computing, and it's quite heavy on that, and it's not usually the primary language that people use for development of web applications. It's not. So one of the reasons, again, why you'd want to consider learning about Python is because you can use it to create whatever tool that you might think about that that is somewhat related to what you're working with. Say you might want to create maybe a web application that collects data. Behind the scenes, you could write Python scripts or programs that analyze that data, and also you could also write maybe a desktop application that displays that data to now stakeholders within an organization. There are also comparisons between Excel and SQL that we've provided. I won't go so much into that. I've provided that those details in the reading, so be sure to also have a look at those comparisons for Excel as well as SQL versus Python. So the Python fundamental concepts that we are going to be going through are these ones. So we'll get to go through just basic concepts in relation to how we write Python code. So when we're working with a programming language, we tend to write code, and code is just computer instructions. So you could write some line of code that tells a computer to read a data set or to read this file that contains a data set in this format. So that could be just a line of code. That could be Python code that you could write. Data types and variables are data types are just classifications that we give to data. It could be that you are collecting text data. It could be that you're collecting numeric data. It could be that you're collecting it could it's called Boolean data, which is just true or false. It depends on the kind of data, but the idea is that once you get to learn about those classifications, then you can perform operations on those that data that you're working with. And you'll note that you may not be able to perform specific operations, such as maybe you may not be able to perform something like mathematical operations on textual data. So you need to first of all understand the data that you're working with first, before then later onwards ensuring that it's ready for further analysis. Variables, just temporary containers that we can use to hold our data and be able to perform just operations on that data. We are also going to learn about functions, how we can organize our code, control structures and loops, how we can be able to go through our code or loop through our code, and also get to learn about what the libraries, which are just, again, a collection of code that has been written by other stakeholders and performs a specific task. We'll get to learn how we can be able to import and work with those libraries. So we won't go so much into that. This will just be just a quick introduction how we can be able to do that. And just take note that this workshop is just one of many of a series of workshops in relation to Python and its use in healthcare. This is usually the starting point. It's for beginners, and if you feel like you're a bit more advanced, you could always explore other workshops that we'll be having about Python. So after this workshop, normally you would go through one in relation to data wrangling. How do you import data from a data set? How do you perform those data pre-processing techniques that are required? Again, also, how do you explore that data? Once you go through that workshop, you can further also focus on how do you filter for specific data that you might have in a larger data set. How do you handle specific use cases that might be important in your data, maybe like outliers? How do you handle missing values? Those are just separate workshops. Then after that, you move on into data visualization. Then after that, you get to learn about different statistical methods. Again, you'll be using different libraries. Like for data wrangling, use pandas and also another library called NumPy, etc. So there's a whole lot of series, and just take this as a long journey that will be critical in your your career. So let's move on to the next thing. The next thing actually would be to now go through the reading and the quiz that we have provided. You should be able to access this if you're an Afterwork member, but if you're not an Afterwork member, you can just skip this section. But again, I would encourage you to consider becoming an Afterwork member and getting the resources that you need in order to further journey in your career. So feel free to access the resources by going to the link that we have shared. So you will see the Afterwork link in the description section of this video, and click on that and it should take you to a page that looks more like share that, a page that looks more like this, but this is only after you have already signed in. So let me see if I sign out, how that would look like. So you should be able to get to this page. This is where you're going to get to, and you could always sign in. You can sign up for, but again, you could always just download the practice resource that we are going to go through in the next section. So if you have access to the quiz and the reading, you can just go through it. You can pause the video, go through it for like 10 minutes. Once you're good to go, then you can be able to now pause the video and now continue to the next section, which will entail going through the practice work. If you now have been able to go through the quiz or if you would want to now go through the practice work, just follow the link, the sample practice resource on your screen, this link, and it should open a notebook that looks like this. This is what we're going to be using to go through the practice concepts that we have already talked about in general, that will be fundamental or will be critical when it comes to undertaking the learning journey that you're going to be undertaking later onwards, maybe data wrangling with Python, or data analysis with Python, data filtering, handling missing values, data visualization. So you will need to learn these concepts. This is like the entry point. So click on that notebook and you should be able to get to this particular page. If you're also an Afterwork member, you should have access to the practice notebook, which has more challenges. So for the sample notebook, we only have challenges for the first two sections. For the rest of the sections, we're just explaining how you use those concepts. But if you want to practice more, feel free to go through to open the practice notebook. So once you have signed in, you can be able to access the practice notebook, and this is what you are going to do. It has challenges all throughout, and you also have access to the solution notebook, which also will have solutions to the challenges. Let's say, for example, this is a challenge. You have a solution to the challenge itself. But for the sample notebook, don't worry about it. I would assume you're testing out the content. But if, again, you want more practice, feel free to just becoming an Afterwork member. Just become an Afterwork member, and it also helps us to be able to develop more content. So just log in for those who are Afterwork members, and you should be able to access the content that we have. So let me do that quickly, and you can access that through by going to this link. So for practice resource, just click on that, and that you don't need to go through the sample notebook. Okay, let's get started. The first thing that you need to do is to, once you've opened this notebook, is to save a copy of this notebook in your drive. So you go to File, then Save a Copy in Drive, and it should open a new tab. Then you close this tab because that link will lead you, the one that I've shared, the one that will be on our platform, will lead you to a master copy, which is what you're seeing, and you don't want to work with a master copy. The reason is because you are, if at some point you want to come back to your work later, you won't see the code that you have written, and you know that's not good. We want to be able to maybe revisit some of the code that we've written in the past, and also you're able to save this notebook in your drive. So yeah, so let's do that. Go to File, then save a copy in Drive. It should open a new tab, and then you can change the name of the notebook to whatever that you want. For me, I would just open mine in playground mode so that I don't make changes to the original one, the original notebook. Yeah, so that we can be all on the same page. Okay. Right, once you've done that, the next thing that you need to do is to connect this particular notebook to Google servers. We are using this notebook. So a notebook, just for explanation, is a document that we can use to write our code and also have some additional content that goes along with the code. You can think of it as more of a Word document that has the ability to run code. So you can have, let's say, a Word document that has paragraphs, images, and then you can have a section that you can be able to click and be able to run code. So a notebook is essentially that. And this notebook, it's the original project, it's called Jupyter Notebooks. You can download and install it in your machines, and the software to be able to work with is called Anaconda. So you can always consider that, Anaconda. But for now, we're not focused on installing locally. Sometimes when you install you install locally, you can get a lot of errors. We're not looking towards that. Our main goal is to get to learn the concepts at hand, or to work towards the learning outcomes. And installation and troubleshooting is not one of the learning outcomes that we are working towards. So let's now, once you have connected, so you on the top right, just click on connect. Should connect to Google servers. Just click on that. It should take a few seconds or so. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it doesn't. So yeah, has connected, as you can see at the top right over here. So the next thing that we need to do is to now expand the different sections. In a notebook, we have cells, we have code cells and text cells. Text cells just contain just textual data, like here we have textual data. And the text, you can just put in just any text, but in order to structure this notebook in a way that is much more flexible, you could also use what is called another language called Markdown. Sorry for introducing that bit. But that is something else that you can always learn. It's called Markdown, but you just work with just normal text. It will just be helpful. And you realize that when you click on a section, there's a text editor that shows up. You can just add, and whatever that you're writing here will actually show up below. Will actually show up once you just click somewhere else. So there are text cells as well as code cells. This is a text cell, and a code cell would be what I can add. I can click on here and add a code cell, and I can have my code in here and also some other text below it explaining what's happening within the code. I can even have another text cells before it. But if I don't want, I can just delete all of this. You don't have to create these cells that I have created. It's just for demonstration purposes. Once you have done that, the next thing that you need to do is to expand the section, the first section. So we're going to go through these first basic concepts, just understanding what they entail, and I will leave it to you to just work on the challenges. So starting off, we'll start off with variables and data types. By the way, feel free to rewind the video, pause the video if you feel like I'm too fast. Again, ask questions in the chat if you want any clarification. We'll be able to answer them. And if someone else has questions or responses to, again, the questions, you can feel free to answer them. So let's start. The first, the most basic concept to learn is usually variables. These are, I'll just talk even just about, let's say, both of them, variables and data types. You can think of variables as just temporary containers, just containers that you can be able to save values inside and be able to manipulate those values later. So for example, here we might have a variable called patient_name and use this operator or equal sign to store this value. On the right, we have a value, and on the left, we have a variable. So we are storing this value, that's John Doe, inside the patient name variable. So this is a piece of text, and text we normally put in double quotes. So if you have a text, maybe your name, you could just write it here, maybe Valentine, I would write it in here, but I would put it in quotes to be able to say that I am working with text data. So I would store this value inside this particular container or variable. I can also store what is called an integer. So here we have just some text that we have. We normally refer to just text times strings. Strings is just it's a data type. So here we're just working with some piece of text which is in a string data type. Or so you can just, again, when it comes to classifications that we give to data, there are different classifications. There's string, there is integers, there is float, which is more like decimal point numbers, and there's also, again, a string. And a string or text, you can just put either double quotes or single quotes. It's still the same. Like, this is a string, this is a string. So we're storing John Doe inside this variable, patient name, the value or integer 35 inside patient age, the value 70.5 inside patient weight, and the value A plus inside patient blood type. I mentioned to you variables, we store values temporarily and later onwards perform some operation on them. For example, in our case, once we have stored them here, we can be able to output those values that these variables contain. So we normally do that using what is called a print statement. So there's print, you write the print keyword, then parentheses. We might want to add maybe some text that we want, and then put a comma, then patient name to refer to the variable name. You could decide to just have these as without even just use just print function, patient name, the same case here, patient age, the same case here, patient weight, and the same case here, patient blood type. You could have it as that to be able to print out the values. Let me just run anyway. That means if you see that pop up, it means you haven't saved a copy in Drive, so do that. So I could do this. I'm printing out the values of the container. So patient name is John Doe, patient age is 35, patient weight is 70.5, patient blood type is that. But what I'm doing here, I'm also adding some more text in front of my output so that I can be able to just provide some context. That's why I'm adding some string before the actual output, and which is patient name with just double colon. But again, strings, you have to enclose them in quotes, comma, then patient name. And then I can also have another string if I wanted to print out. I can say patient name. I can just put a H, and you will see that what will be outputted will actually be another string here. But that's what I don't. That's not what I want. So yeah, so that's how we can be able to store variables in different data types, and also be able to print them out. So just rerun that again. That's what we need to be able to see. The bottom part of this code cell, this is a code cell, this is a text cell. Oh, sorry. This is a text cell here. The bottom part is where we call it, we call usually this part as a console, and we're able to output our values there. So if you want just another explanation, you could always just go through this content that we have provided here. It's an explanation that tells you what's happening within that code cell. All right. At this point, you can pause the video, work on the challenge, and then once you're good to go, again, if you have Afterwork membership, you can always just check the solution notebook to just verify your solution. But again, work on the challenge, which again, it's just this particular challenge. But for this one, we provided just one of the, like some starter code that you can be able to use to just be able to go about it. But for this one, like for example, you're creating variables to store heat, temperature, heart rate, and blood pressure. So we've done that for temperature first, but you can always do that for, you can always work towards now heart rate and blood pressure using the same format as we've done. All right, once you have done that, once you've gone through the solution, we can go to the second concept, basic arithmetic operators. So these are just operations that allow us to perform mathematical calculations, maybe such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. So for example, we might have two numbers, let's say 150 plus 75. If we wanted to, again, if we have two numbers, 150 and 75, to add them, we would use the addition operation or operator. It's called an operator. So we can do the same as you can see here. So actually, like before, instead we were storing one value, but now inside the variable, but now we can do the operation and then store the result of the operation inside the value, inside the variable, and then print out the variable, as you can see here. But again, we can also decide to create two variables, as you can see here, dosage 1 and dosage 2 with these two values, and then decide to create another variable and define how we want to perform our arithmetic operation. So we can use parentheses, then take dosage 1 plus dosage 2. Remember, these ones have to be integers or floats. If you put a string, you'll get an error. Then we put parentheses to do the addition for that, and then divide by 2, and then we print out the value of average dosage, and that's what we want. So you can go through the explanation if you need some further explanation, and then go through the challenge. So far we have gotten to learn how to print out. So we use a print, it's called a function. Again, functions, we haven't gotten to have gone through them, but we'll get to go through them later. So far we have been able to learn how to print out using the print statement or print function, and print is a built-in function, which means it's already provided by Python. But there are also many other built-in functions. There's average, there's max, they're different functions, but we can also create ours, but we get to learn how to do that. So work on that. Okay, I think we should be good to go. Let's now go through printing output. So it's just the same concept. You just use the the print function as you had seen earlier, and you need to have the parentheses. So you can print out even just a string. You don't even need sometimes to have whatever. You just need to print, give the print function something to print out, and it will print. So run that. I think that's self-explanatory because we've already covered that in the previous example, and also work on the challenge too. Now, here we are able to use a print function to print out, but we can also use what are called F strings. This is another way that is also important. You'll get to see F strings, or this way, used a lot when it comes to printing functions. It's an efficient way. Let's just say that, and it's important. So F strings allow us to be able to print out also. But again, they also allow us to be able to include variables within our strings. So for example, if we wanted to print out patient name, then the patient name, like what we did before, like here, instead of using this approach, we can use what is called an F string. So inside the print function, we have the F. You can place, it can be a capital F or small f, then double quotes or single quotes, then the string that we want, patient name, then in curly braces, we define the variable that we want to print out as shown. And then of course, so you'd see F, then quotes or double quotes, then whatever that we want, which is a string, but whatever that will be in curly braces would actually be the variable that we want to print out. It's important because you can even have multiple variables, as opposed to if you use this method, it can be a bit tricky, but you'd have to, assuming that you wanted to print out maybe patient name inside, you wanted to print out patient name inside the string, then it can be a bit tricky. You'd have to have a longer statement. All right, so let's run that, and you should be able to see the output. All right, work on the challenge, and then we can continue to the next section. Data types and variables. So I already mentioned that data types are just classifications that we give to data. So there are different data types, classifications. There's numeric data types, which is integers and floats. Floats are just decimal points numbers. Like integers, we might want to store maybe something like an age. We assign it numeric data type. There is string, which is just text that we might have. Boolean is just true or false. We'll also now get to learn about lists, tuples, and dictionaries. So numeric data types, I think we're already familiar with that. Like 2 is a numeric data type, 10 is a numeric data type. We could also have 10.5, which are decimal points, which are also numeric data types. We can also perform just operations on them. So number of pills times per day times number of days, we'll be able to get the outcome of that. And you might realize we are learning these basic concepts, which are but just Python fundamentals that will be important later onwards when you get to learn about complex, operations. Maybe you have a data set and you have two columns, numerical columns, and you might want to perform something like a multiplication across them. Then you can be able to do that. All right, work on the challenge for numeric data types, and then we can continue. String data types, this is more like what we had before. So string, this is a string, this is a string, but this is not a string, this is an integer. So if you try to add a string and an integer, you'll get a problem, but you need to convert now the integer into a string. As shown here, we use a string function to be able to do that. So here we are going to be concatenating, or concatenating just means you are going to be joining strings. So in our case here, we have patient name plus patient name. So you'll be able to see that it's patient name, John Doe, patient age 35. If you remove this str, you'll get an error. So if I run this, I should be able to get an error, and that's not what we want. You can see it even tells us cannot concatenate or join string to str. So let's fix that. All right, work on the challenge, and once you're done, you can hit continue. By the way, you can always pause if you want. Boolean data type, true or false values. So in our case, we had just these different string. This is an integer. You can also have a float. But now, if you want to store just true or false, then we can use what is called a Boolean data type. And we normally use this when it comes to just having conditions in our code. And we'll get to learn more about that. But yeah, that's how we can get to work with them. If you print them out, you can always just, you'll actually get something like false. Let's say patient, has diabetes. If I print that, let me run this. If I print that, I'll get true as the outcome. A list data type. So a list is that data type that allows us to store multiple, it just allows us to store multiple values within one particular variable. So for example, initially we were storing maybe one value inside this value, one value inside this value, but we want multiple of them inside one, let's say, variable. So it's that container that allows us to store collection of items. So we can say create a list. We usually use square brackets. So here we have two lists, and these are the values that they contain. So each and every list, or we call them items, has the respective elements. So we have syringes, bandages, gloves, and masks. Then inside the list, so square brackets, inside the square brackets, we have now those elements or items, and we separate them by commas. And sometimes you might also, if it's a number, you can just store it as a number, as just like that. It's still also okay. And once we have created a list, which we have done here, we can be able to print them out using what is called a for loop. So a for loop is a control structure that we'll get to learn that allows us to print out the items in the list. So first of all, we print out this string, then we use a for loop. So we say, we use a for keyword, then we define the current item and use in to be able to iterate. Then we define the list. So we are going to, inside the for loop, we're going to print out the items. The same case with pharmaceuticals. So we're going to print out syringes, bandages, gloves, and masks. You can play around with this, and you can also get to learn more about them. We won't go so much into lists, but again, if you need more resources on lists as well as other data types. So for example, if you want to update lists, delete maybe items in a list, or update them, feel free to ask in the chat for such resources. We might consider that in the future, or even other Python fundamental courses, and recommend for you to go through them. So you can see here we have displayed the items in the lists. You can work on the challenge, and then you can continue. A tuple data type is almost like a list. The only thing is that you cannot be able to update or change the items. For a list, you can update them, but for tuples, you cannot be able to update them. So, but again, with a tuple, you don't use a square bracket, you use a parenthesis. So, and then you define the elements that you want inside. So this is what we can be able to do that. We can be able to do You can also be able to access the elements inside the tuple by using this method. So use a square bracket. You actually reference the tuple and then use a square bracket. Then you say you want the position of the element. And the elements are usually from position 0, 1, 2, 3. So you'll get 0, 1, 2, 3 elements. And you can use the same approach for lists. So you can just, if this was a list, you can always just be able to retrieve them, as you can see here. So we have retrieved them, but if I change this to a list, which just changing the square bracket at the very end, I should be able to retrieve the same just elements as the case. But this now, let me put back to the tuple. All right, work on the challenge and then we can continue. Dictionary, on the other hand, is that type of, it's a data type that we can be able to use to be able to store data, additional data. So instead of storing just a collection of items, we normally use have what are called key value pairs. It's like we're introducing another dimension. So if you want to have maybe patient information, we can store it in this format: name, then John Doe, age, then the value, gender, etc. And we can also have even further, let's say name, then another dictionary, then name, then first name, John, then second name, and then second name, Doe, something like that. So dictionaries can be as complex as we would want, but this is just an easier way of just storing data temporarily and be able to perform some operations on that data. More like variables, but now here it's a bit more complex. How we display them, say we usually use, again, the for loop, but now instead of using one variable as we did in our previous example here, here we used item, just one. Here we use two variables to hold just a current item. So key value, I want to print out the key and the value, and we use an F string to be able to print out, and we have a for loop. When you're creating a for loop, what comes after the for statement, the next line needs to have some indent. So otherwise you'll get a problem. So always ensure that's what you have. And by the way, you can always be copy pasting the code to your challenge and completing that as well. So key value in, then the patient info, then we reference now the items using the items function, which you can see there. If we run this, we should be able to see name, age, etc., gender, hypertension, etc. All right, we're done with that. Let's move on to working with functions. Functions are a way of just organizing our code. We can define a function. So like the print statement is a function that has already been written, and it just prints out something. So we can also write our own custom function. So for example, by the way, we can also go through the text above if you want to just understand more. So for example, we might want to create a custom function called calculate dosage, and that function takes in a weight. Just like the way the print function takes in some string and prints it out, a function usually takes something, it does an operation, and then it outputs some value. So in our case, we are going to calculate the dosage. We're going to give it weight. So we would be giving a number, which would be weight, and then that number will be multiplied by 0.1 and stored in dosage, and then we will return that value that we have given, we would get. So the output of this function would be returned using the return keyword, which is now the dosage. So run that, and just to understand how we can be able to create a function. And sometimes you might not even have an input for a function. You might just want maybe to print out some value inside, but you need to maybe have this as maybe static information. So, and also you can have multiple values, parameters, and also what are called default parameters, which are just parameters that you want. So yeah, so run that and work on the challenge. For now, if you're on the sample notebook, you won't get the challenge, but consider again becoming an afterwork member for the challenge. But you can just run the code, as you can see. Function parameters. So I have already talked about parameters. So here we had only one parameter, which is weight, which is just an input. We might have multiple parameters, maybe weight, patient weight, and medical dosage, and we take in those values. Then inside the function, and you have inside the function, it's like one indent. It's an indent. So when you hit the tab key, if you're here, that's an indent. It can be just one or two, but it has to be an indent. So inside the function, you can be able to perform your operation and return the value. And to be able to use this function, we can be able to initially, let's say, once we have defined the function, we then define maybe the variables that, or the input data that we want to give the function. Then we call the function by saying calculate dosage, and then we use the parenthesis, and then we give our values, which is patient weight and medical dosage, and we store the output of this inside result, and we print it out. Let's run that. Return statements, we can also do the same thing. I've already talked about sometimes a function may not return something. So sometimes we might want to have a function that returns some value, and this is what we have. We can return dosage, and we use the return keyword inside the function to be able to do that. Just the same thing as we had learned earlier. Here we have a return keyword, but this just gives you just more practice for that. You can also work on the challenge if you are on the practice notebook. Lambda functions. So lambda functions are just a way of just writing functions in a simpler way, only that we use just one line of code. So we have the name of the function, which is calculate BMI. We equals it. It's like almost like, having this, instead of using the def keyword, just define the name of the function equal to, and we use the lambda keyword, and we define the input parameters, weight and height. So instead of just putting, them in parentheses, we just define it as shown. Then what we have in our body, and that's the code that will be inside. So it could be this code that we have here. And we do not define this other code for returning automatically. What would be here, what will come after the double colon will actually be returned. So, and then we just define the input data, and then we output it as shown. So run that. All right. Almost towards the end, control structures. We have if-else statements. Sometimes we might want to perform maybe some logical operation, like determine maybe if an element is equal to something, maybe if this value, patient age, contains the value 65, do something like, so for example, if patient age is less than 18, which is not because it's 65, we might want to print out something else. If it's greater than 18 and also less than 65, perform something else, you can print out something. So this is just a way of just writing code, and we can be able to use also keywords like and or even or to be able to define our conditions. But for both, for this case, these two expressions, like patient equals greater than 18 and less than 65, have to be true to be able to run what's going to be here. All right, run that and then continue. Nested if. Nested if is more like what we have here, only that when this turns out to be true, we have another if statement inside. That's what we're having here. So if this turns out to be true, if patient age is less than 18, we print out what's here, then we also have another if statement inside. So yeah, that's just about it. I think I've talked about for loops. For loops are just a way of just iterating through code. And through a collection of items. It can be either through a list, tuple, or even a string, and we use a for keyword for that. Then in, so cost would just contain the current variable, and we would be able to do that. This statement actually means this, for just putting a comment, it just means total costs is equals to total costs plus cost. So this is just a shortened form of just what we have here. So we are going to iterate through all of these elements, and we are going to add and have some total cost of medication shown. All right, at this particular point, I actually would want to allow you to continue in your learning journey by just going through the entire session in a self-paced manner. The reason is because sometimes it's important to go through content by yourself to be able to understand. We've provided content and explanations that will help you just understand what's happening. And the idea is that you should be in a good position to understand basically Python fundamentals for your learning journey. I would go so much into the rest of the content. I think that's it for this particular workshop. If you have any questions, feel free to ask in the chat, and hopefully